Kill the programming.
My name is Joshua Silva. I am a licensed commercial pilot and flight instructor. I have had a lifelong love of aviation and aerospace, and when growing up I even fancied myself an amateur astronomer. I would drag my family and friends, anybody I could, to every air show I could possibly find in Northern California. I was the only kid you knew, or anybody knew, that knew the various components on aircraft, spacecraft by heart. I absolutely loved anything to do with flying or space. But my love of aviation and aerospace never stopped. I continued studying, had an entire library full of aviation books of various military and civilian aircraft, military history, every aviation campaign and theater in almost any war. I studied religiously, and it was just out of pure passion. Later in life, many years later, I decided to become a pilot. As strange as it may sound, it hadn't occurred to me to become a pilot up to that point. I just simply loved aviation and aerospace, but I decided to become a pilot, and I began attending a prestigious flight academy in the Midwest and attending university at the same time, and to gain a degree in aeronautics and aerospace. Shortly thereafter, I began flying twin turboprop aircraft out of Northern California for several nonprofit organizations, and years after that I found myself flight instructing for various small flight schools, both in California and in Arizona, and then on to large academies that trained for the airlines and even some military flights. Shortly thereafter, I began flying regional business jets, and that's when the story of me finding the topic of flat Earth started.
Been a military brat all my life. However, I've been in the industry of aviation for the last 21 years. And I became an FE somewhere around 15 or 16. When I really started looking at conspiracies, I looked into Benghazi because I happen to work on government contracts abroad, overseas. But I've been in aviation for 21 years, anything from helicopters to aerostats to big birds, little birds, fighter jets, things with engines, no engines, big blades, little blades, compressor blades, which, by the way, that one's not a hoax. Jets do not run only on compressed air. Contrary to popular belief, it takes compressed air in a blended ratio of air to fuel to drive the now heated gas and rotate the compressor blades. This has been a topic of discussion between FE and, not everything's a hoax. Coriolis effect. With that ties into, obviously with no spin, around the axis points that they say exist at 23.4 conveniently, 66 off the 90 degrees, right? Everything ties into 666 with NASA and all the BS scientists. Our aircraft have things called ADIs, attitude direction indicator, which gives correlation between the aircraft housing or the shell around the gyro itself. The ADI is nothing more than a gyro that will always reference level. I don't care what any pilot says. I don't care what any mechanic tells you. There's a reason that pilots have one book called a Pilot Operating Handbook, and there's every other book, right? From structures to avionics to wiring diagrams to the actual components that make up these systems. That is a standalone system. The ADI does not lie. I don't care how cold it is, how high you are, and some of these guys are pretty damn high. It doesn't matter where you're going. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter where you are over the realm itself.
I woke up to the truth of the flat Earth, shape of the Earth, as an engineer and a pilot. So I've studied engineering, physics, 3 different ways: basic physics, electric physics, and construction physics. And also as a pilot, as a rotary wing pilot, that is helicopter pilot, I studied aeronautical physics as well. So I can cover and discuss just about any factor of flat Earth. Not that I'm any smarter than anybody else, but I've studied quite a bit of factors that analyze shape and motion of just about any object. That's physics, also aeronautical physics, and principles of flight. I can tell you this, airplanes fly straight and level. That's even an aviation term, straight and level. Airplanes will fly for hours at the same altitude, never dipping their nose down to follow the curve of the Earth. An aircraft on a 12-hour or even 18-hour flight from Portland, Oregon to Seoul, Korea, that would have that aircraft starting at one point and then flying so far around the Earth that it's flying downwards with its nose vertically downwards, and then starting to go around the curve of the Earth so that the airplane is now flying upside down. Would have to make that kind of a flight path on a globe, which is, it's such an absurdity. So that being said, I come into the true shape of the Earth, the flat Earth, as a skeptic, like most anyone else. I'll tell you my story. My buddy told me about this. He said, Rob, you need to learn about the ice ring. You need to learn that the Earth doesn't move. This globe is garbage. And I laughed at him. I said, are you kidding me? I'm not even gonna look into that. And he said, that's fine. He said, that's fine. You don't have to look into flat Earth. But until you do, he said, until you do look into flat Earth, you will remain a slave of the Matrix. And interestingly enough, at this point, this was more or less November, December 2015. I had already mentally resigned from the U.S. military for 3 years. I had already resigned because of Benghazi. I realized, and I saw for myself, I'd been working with U.S. as an Army officer, working for State Department for a good 10 years. And so what I did, I turned my physics awareness, I turned my studies into analysis of the shape of the Earth.
I'm a merchant marine. I've been sailing 15 years. I graduated from the Paul Hall Maritime Center out of Piney Point, Maryland. I primarily sail on container ships, tankers, drill ships, military cargo vessels, you name it, I can sail on it. My sailing capacity of bosun, my whole title is AB Unlimited. That primarily sail deep sea and coastal, meaning up and down the coast, west coast, east coast, and deep sea is out deep sea across to other continents. What led me to the flat Earth was actually my sister. We've always been into the conspiracies and the 9/11 and Sandy Hook and all that stuff. And one day she said, hey, you want to see a conspiracy? You should look into the flat Earth. And I looked at her and laughed because I had seen the videos come up in the feed and they showed that disc thing in the space and I laughed at it and whatever. And she showed it to me and I laughed at her. And I went and pulled out my phone and I looked up a video. You can look it up. It's called Dragon Link FPV to Space. And what you'll see is basically an RC airplane that's been taken up about 80,000 feet. And they release it and then the airplane comes down with power. And it has the Dragon Link system which is capable of making control and video. Anyways, but they had a GoPro, so you see this curved globe. And you know, that said it for me. When I saw that, I was like, oh wow, look at that. So I brought that down to her, put it right in her face and said, look at that. And looking back, I remember her smile on it was like, you know, okay, she wasn't going to argue with me. And she said, okay. Later on, I don't know, a couple days later, whenever, I seen it in there and I said, all right, I had nothing to watch. I hit it on the YouTube and I knew within 10 minutes of it. I forget which one it was. I think it was probably one of the documentaries, but it was almost like I instantly knew. And then what happened was a lot of the proofs that I had were before I was a flat earther, such as seeing contacts at 30 miles out with the naked eye on the horizon, which is impossible on the globe model. So much so, it was me, the third officer, and the lookout. We were standing our watch, and I believe we were in the Mediterranean Sea. Look and watch. I say, okay, we got a contact out there. We look and we try and get it on the radar. We get it at 30 miles out. When the chief mate came up, we had told him, hey mate, we got a contact earlier 30 miles out. He said, bull crap. I don't believe you. And we all looked at each other and shook our heads and said, yeah, they got it. He stormed off the bridge, ran down, came back up. He had the Bowditch, which is a thick green book that's everything you ever need to know about being on the ocean, sailing, navigation, everything. And he comes up and he says, the math doesn't lie. And he slams down this piece of paper and he says, our bridge height is at 100 feet versus how far? 30 miles. It should have been behind like 600 foot of curve. I remember 600 something foot. He had all the mathematical, of course I didn't know, okay, that's good. All right, he must know what he's talking about. But we're looking like, well, I don't know. We got it on the radar. Then the radar must not know what it's doing.
You can just call me Jay. That's what my friends call me. That's what I go by. I just go by Jay. My work experience, I joined the Navy when I was 17 years old. I had a secret security clearance. There's different levels of security clearance. There's a lower level, then there's a secret, which is what I had, which is like a mid-level, and then there's a top secret. I did not have a top secret clearance, so there's a lot that I don't know. But I did have a secret clearance. So it's basically the mid-level security clearance for the government that I had. And I did that job for 8 years. I worked in operational intelligence specifically. The radar navigation, there's a limited scope of what we're able to see. Now, granted, this is 15 or 20 years ago. What I mean by that is, with it being 15 or 20 years ago, the technology nowadays on the new warships, I would imagine, are just off the charts advanced compared to what we had, 20 years ago in the early 2000s when I was doing deployments for the Navy. We're looking at the scope of the radar. Now, this is just going off of the actual screen that we can see. Now, there's 3 different screens. There's the basic radar screen where we have this limited scope where it only goes out like 25 miles, right? Then there's this other bigger screen, and I forgot the name of it, but it goes onto this huge projection in the Combat Information Center. Basically is where all of the information is housed. And on this huge screen, we can actually zoom out and see a significant portion of our area of responsibility. I can't say the exact number. Again, a lot of this is classified. Basically, when we zoom out onto this large projectile screen, it goes in and out, right? So the reason why we're able to zoom in and then pull back out is just for accuracy. So if we're looking at something that could just be like a buoy in the water, right? Just one of the little tiny buoys that the ships can use as kind of placements to track where they're going, that can be mistaken for an actual small watercraft. So we have to be able to differentiate between that and some of the ships that we're looking for, because some of the deployments we're on, we're out there looking for drug ships, we're looking for other types of ships, submarines, basically just to keep a track of everything. That's basically what the Navy and Coast Guard do. They want to make sure that they know what's going on in the seas, and that's kind of the way the United States Navy operates. They're basically dictating what happens in international waters.
I will be providing my in-depth experience of U.S. Navy submarines and how they prove we do not live on a globe Earth. However, due to the nature of my job and the security clearance that I hold, I wish to remain anonymous. I've worked for the U.S. Department of the Navy as a submarine quality assurance specialist for the last 5 years. My job is to ensure that each submarine is built properly, safely, and to the engineer's plan. I have an intimate knowledge of every aspect of each submarine being built in the shipyard I work in. Now that you've heard a little bit of my background, let me explain how I arrived at the crazy notion that the Earth is visibly and observably flat. I have always questioned the reality around me since I was little. I never followed anything mainstream, and I was never interested in what the news had to say. As I got older, I started looking into more and more things out of my own curiosity. 9/11, school shootings, I eventually started researching the moon landing because it just never set well with me. And it didn't take long for me to completely unravel that for the hoax that it is. After that, I was starting to realize that we had been lied to on so many levels. What else could there possibly be? Then I saw a video about the flat earth pop up on my YouTube recommendations. At first, even with my awakened mind, I thought this was absolutely ridiculous. I decided that I'd look into it simply to disprove it and move on. It should be easy, right? That was over 6 years ago, and I still can't disprove the flat earth. In fact, the more I research it, the more it reveals. This leads me into my submarine experience. Looking back on everything I had accomplished while on active duty with eyes to see, has only served to solidify my stance that we live on a flat and motionless plane.
Also, there's a semi-classified naval communications device. When ships are communicating ship to ship on the ocean, U.S. Navy, semi-classified laser communication NAVCOM device, which also does data as well. So if they're communicating with ships 70 miles, 100 miles or more, like I said, every 100 miles is a mile of curvature. So it wouldn't work because lasers operate line of sight. They operate in a straight line. There's no curvature to the laser. So the bottom line here is the naval NAVCOM classified, semi-classified system that they use to communicate ship to ship, that operates on a laser, and if there was curvature, anything over, like I said, 100 miles is 5,280 feet of curvature, and the ship's diameter is nowhere near that, which you know. So there's another example, the naval NAVCOM communication device. Also, there's a woman, female KLH pilot, KLH Dutch Commercial Airlines. She got fired from her job a while back for questioning this issue. Now, they didn't throw around the company, but they gave her like a desk job, so this way they kind of keep her around and quiet so they can control. But she's a very sane and rational woman. If they ask her, what happened, and she starts talking, it's going to raise serious questions. So we got the KLH pilot, we got the laser NAVCOM, U.S. Navy. We've got my personal experience flying from Long Island to Bangkok. There should be at least 5,280 feet of curvature added to the 4,000 altitude average while heading easterly. So there's something very wrong there. The numbers don't work.
Could the Earth actually be flat? I began to see opinions and arguments that seemed logical, but I heard several arguments, which I now know were most likely disinformation, easily disprovable in the aviation world, but there were some that stuck with me. And so, myself being the way I am, I ran quickly, metaphorically, to my old textbook. And I opened my old textbooks, found them, unpacked them, cracked them all open, and even downloaded brand new copies in PDF form offline of all these books to make sure that nothing had been changed. I thought for certain that I knew exactly what compensation pilots are trained while flying to compensate for the spin or the rotation of the Earth, for instance. As far as falling around a globe, I assumed in my mind would be an aircraft's angle of attack. But upon more study, I found that not to be true. The angle of attack being the angle between the aircraft's flight path and the relative wind, which is something that pilots are very familiar with. And it's the idea that an aircraft has to be slightly pitched up, essentially to stay airborne, or a surface of that aircraft has to be pitched slightly to create a difference in air pressure to hold the aircraft aloft. And that is assumed, or was assumed at that time by myself and other pilots, to be the compensation one would make for falling around a globe while flying, period. But upon further research, I found that this was not the case, and it was not even mentioned anywhere. This compensation was not mentioned anywhere I could find in any resource that I had gone to flight school with. And they were extensive. There were many, many books, especially as one progressed towards the commercial flying side, especially elective courses, especially if you're going to university as I was studying aerospace, then you would assume, and I had assumed, that this was calculated for.
Again, as far as ADIs, in every aircraft, it references the level horizon or references sea level always. There's no way that you can convince somebody of sound mind that if you take off from New York and immediately flip upside down, now your housing or your ADI is referencing upside down to you because you're upside down. It's right side up. It cannot deviate off level. It doesn't matter how much fuel you got in your tanks. It doesn't matter if you're a helicopter or an aerostat or a fighter jet. That gauge will always reference level. It has to, because otherwise it would be a poor reference. And if you could manipulate it, why would you even have it in the airplane or your aircraft? But if you go take off 2 miles away, do a barrel roll, you're now flying upside down. At what point does that gauge show you back right side up? A half a hemisphere away? Is that what we're led to believe? Is that what we're supposed to believe? At what point does it right itself if you never flipped back over and continued flying level? You see what I'm saying? It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous to think that thing compensates for curvature in straight and level flight.
The big one that is oftentimes quoted is compensation for Coriolis effect while flying. And this is something I'd even taught my students about, and it's always assumed to be correct. We just assume. We're given the narrative from a young age, and everything is built upon that assumption, upon that theory. And so I thought I had the silver bullet. Coriolis effect. We always calculate for that. Well, as I began to look through the books and to look into the calculations given for Coriolis effect, the narrative began to fall apart even further. I began to see things I didn't notice when I was in school, such as Coriolis effect is actually never calculated for, but is assumed to be a part of wind correction angle. Wind correction angle is one of the many calculations pilots of all kinds make while flying to correct against winds in whatever volume or section of air they're flying through, which it could be from any direction, and you're flying through it, so you have to compensate a certain angle into that wind to hold a straight line.
Interesting side note, I worked on aerostats for several years, and I always ask people who try to bring up gravity, well, how come my 4,000 pound, 74,000 cubic foot aerostat isn't getting pushed towards the ground? It weighs more than you do, which you believe gravity is pushing you down, right? Because these are some dense ass people. But how come the aerostat's not getting driven into the ground? It weighs more. It's definitely larger than the size of a house. It's more than size of most houses. So why isn't it getting driven to the ground? Well, that's because it's displacing less weight than the atmosphere or the medium that it's in. And I try explaining that. I don't know how many times you've probably posted something on this. I don't know how many times we're going to have to post something on this. But every time that little kid lets go of that helium balloon and starts crying.
Radar is simply another form of radio transmission. Radio includes anything within the range of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic spectrum, also known as light. Radio is the transmission of light, whether it's visible light or radio waves which are not visible. When it comes to radio transmissions, there must be a transmitter and a receiver. There can be a reflector or a transmittal unit along the way. However, in the end, there's got to be at least transmitter and a receiver. And in the case of radar, radar transmits a signal and it bounces off a reflector, and then it comes back to the receiving station. Or it can go to other stations if they're set up in the network properly. Long story short, radar emits a signal, it bounces off something, and then it returns to a receiving unit, and the receiving unit maps that reflection accordingly. If there is no reflector, then there's no return signal, and then the object does not show up on the radar. For example, it's off the screen. Notice, there's no curving around anything. It goes out in a straight line. Radio signals always travel in a straight line. So the transmitter sends the signal out to the target, bounces off, and it comes back in a straight line. Radar cannot travel over the curve, and hence, radar is dependent on line of sight, direct beam from the transmission to the target. It reflects and it comes straight back. There is no curving around anything, thus is radar.
Also, radar works in straight lines. The radar is incapable of curving around a curve, picking up and bouncing back the reflection of what it's picking up. So if you can imagine a ship on the other side of the curve, we'll say 30 miles, 40 miles out, it sends out the radar beam. The radar beam is supposedly curving around this ball, bouncing back, and then bouncing the reflection, curving back around to be picked up by the radar. That's not happening. It's flying out straight, and when it picks up something, it hits it back. It's not going around any curve. That's plain and simple. That can be looked up on your YouTube and see how radar waves work. They don't go around the curve. Every diagram shown will show you straight lines. They don't show you curved lines.
As we zoom out to look at the larger scope of things, once we verify that, we're able to zoom out over a large distance. Now, over this screen, at the time, I was like 18 or 19 years old, all right, when I was doing this job. I wasn't thinking about flat earth and any of this other shit. I was still indoctrinated and under the assumption that the earth is a spinning ball. I never thought about flat earth or anything like that, but I always thought it was weird that as I'm looking at this massive radar screen, I always used to think, how come we're looking at this and I can see, like, we're off of the coast of Argentina, for instance, right? Like, how is it that I can see this far out and it's not like over the horizon or curve, because it's so far? Like I said, we use a lot of these other link signals, and they're called links. They go by different names. I can't say the code names. Some of them I forgot. Some of them are, again, this is classified information. I can't give any specifics on these. But some of the links that we use, not only do we speak to the actual ships and track them, but we speak to aircraft, 10,000, 20,000, 30 and higher, 30,000 feet and higher is what I'm saying. It's not just a matter that they're 30,000 feet directly. It's not like they're directly above the ship. This is what's interesting, is this aircraft could be 50, 60 miles away and 30,000 feet in the air. So you understand, like, the angle that you have to take to be able to track this aircraft from a ship that's moving on the water. Think about that for a second.
I served on board of a United States 688I fast attack nuclear submarine, and I can personally attest that we never constantly angled down during our submarine deployments. One of our longest transits went from the Gulf of Oman around the southern tip of Africa and back to Connecticut. We were underwater for almost 3 months straight. My job on board as a radioman meant that I spent a lot of time both in the radio room and in the control room. The control room is where they navigate and drive the submarine. I never once, in my 5 years active duty, heard the officer of the deck or the diving officer give the order to consistently change the angle of the submarine to compensate for the curvature of the Earth. The primary task of the diving officer and the helms and plainsman is to maintain the submarine as level as possible while in transit. If the Earth had any measurable curvature, I am certain we would not have been able to make this incredibly long transit without accounting for it.
And then the big one is given after that. Well, GPS auto corrects for it. And that sent me down yet another path. GPS auto corrects for it. If it's a satellite-based system, how is it correcting for spin if it's also spinning over the same body? And why are there large gaps in GPS coverage over large oceanic bodies? Do they just turn them off? It's just not worthwhile? There have been enough aviation accidents at sea, very far from shore, that would say otherwise. And if you gave the American taxpayers, the ones funding these satellites that are supposed to track aircraft, the information that, well, we're just shutting them off because it's not worthwhile, those 3 or 4 jets full of hundreds of passengers just have to use other navigation methods such as dead reckoning, which is basically using a stopwatch and guessing to the next checkpoint, essentially. If you were to tell them that, they would be infuriated. So that could not be the case. Coverage was a problem. Even over large and non-densely populated areas, you would lose GPS coverage, even in jets at times. So this began to unravel the thread of satellites and satellite timing, and the fact that many reels of footage show these satellites being launched by balloon rather than by rockets. How the concept of these rockets doesn't even work to make it pass the atmosphere, much less leave something in perfect geosynchronous orbit. I actually had the privilege of working a short time at a satellite manufacturing company in Northern California. Got to see the assembly and participate in the assembly of satellites, space-based satellites, or so they are said. There would be small bottles encased in these structures that were encased by another structure. The small bottles were the fuel cells. These fuel cells were incredibly small, smaller than a diver's tank in most cases, much smaller. And this was supposed to be all the fuel that the craft needed to run and operate, as most are not actually electric, they're becoming electric now, and sustain itself in a perfect orbit by just small bursts from its engine or its propulsion system.
But truth be told, I've been to many countries, done many things, all things aviation. I can say with absolute certainty, and I can attest, the plane does not dip nose down to follow the curvature of the Earth, ever. Matter of fact, most planes have an airfoil that are 3 degrees nose up in straight and level flight. And the reason that is simple. If the nose of the aircraft was at 0 degrees or level flying through the air, then it would porpoise, right? It would be quite violent because some of the air would go over the nose and some of the air would go under the nose. And it would cause that nose to go up and down, which is literally like a porpoise or a dolphin out of water. And that's exactly what would happen. So the wings are designed, when they are level, the nose is 3 degrees nose up.
The fact, proven from multiple points, that there is no Coriolis to the motion of the Earth. And I'm speaking from a pilot's perspective, also an engineer's perspective, because I obtained a degree as an engineer before I went to flight school. So I'm both a pilot and engineer at once. So, number one, there is no rotation of the Earth, proven by the fact that a helicopter pilot can hover the aircraft indefinitely, motionless, above a single point of the Earth. If the Earth were spinning, as soon as that aircraft left the ground, the Earth would spin out from under it. Now, somebody may say that the air of the atmosphere rotates along with the Earth, which is one of the most absurd concepts imaginable, because if that were the case, then all wind would travel with the Earth. There would be no alternating wind currents when we know that the jet streams fly overhead, clouds move in multiple directions overhead, and a kite flying over the stationary Earth. The fact that a kite flies because of wind passing through, that proves that the Earth does not. That proves that the air does not move in unison with the Earth. Number two, airstrips do not rotate away from a landing aircraft. Anybody who's seen a pilot's view when an aircraft lands, well, the aircraft lands to a motionless airstrip. If the Earth were rotating, the pilot would have to turn to the angle at which the airstrip is rotating away and land at the speed of the airstrip, which is absurd, simply absurd. Airstrips do not rotate away from the aircraft, and on an east to west landing strip, if the aircraft is landing to the west, the airstrips do not land moving towards the airplane. That's insanity. Okay, simply stated.
If the Earth was a spinning ball, it is virtually impossible for a ship to be moving at 25 to 30 knots on this curved spinning ball while tracking an aircraft that's probably going 300 miles per hour, 50 to 100 miles away. Really, I mean, these like P3 aircrafts were pretty far and 20,000 feet in the air. It's just virtually impossible. It doesn't make sense. Again, at the time, I wasn't thinking like this, but looking back on the information that I had, I'm like, yeah, there's no way. There's no way that that was done on a curved Earth. Literally, the only way that could work is if we are on a flat, stationary plane. We're cruising along. The boat is cruising along in the water. Like, think about it in terms of like a large, like, you know, like those backyard swimming pools. Picture the swimming pool filled up, right? And then your ship, you put a little boat on the swimming pool, and then, you know, you put like a little fake aircraft in the air. Now, from that ship, you're able to see the aircraft. It doesn't matter where you are in that pool, you can track that aircraft. If you're on a spinning ball curve, how the hell can you track an aircraft that could be in a position that's 100 to 200 miles away from you, 30,000 feet in the air from a different angle that's around a curve? It's impossible. There's no way that you could, there's no radio frequency that could track that.
I'd like to point out that I see now that I didn't see before is that you have a magnetic compass and you have a gyro on any ship. And I'm not talking about your little crabberman show fishing boat, what are they, deadliest cat. I'm talking about a real deep sea going, unlimited tonnage boat's going to have a gyro. And it is a big, huge box that sits usually behind the bridge or in the chart room. It's a big box and it's basically the gyro compass. Now, if you had two models, I guess, wouldn't you have to have one making the corrections, because it almost never matches the magnetic almost never matches the gyro. It's very rare that we're steering the same course. And they say it's due to deviation and variation is where you know, like the metals of the ship causes it to differ. And then you have the variation of the magnetic fields over the earth is, I guess they change, you know, true north and magnetic north. But the way I look at it is, man, they got two different machines. One is a machine and one is from God. The way to get around the earth. God's not a dummy. He put the way to get around the earth with the compasses. If back in the day they had motorized vessels that can get them around, they would probably have got around a lot better. But they were at the mercy of the wind. People was like, oh, they didn't know their way, or, you know, they were using the stars and stuff, and they, you know, so I just believe that the two compasses, the gyro compass that's electronic, and then our regular compass is because they are switching the ways, you know, the maps. There's two different ways to get around the earth. They're tricking us.
Here is another flat earth proof that I never noticed while I was on active duty, thanks to years of indoctrination. Periscope observations. When the submarine is at periscope depth and the observer is looking for ships on the horizon, they will start to see masts at about 8 to 9 miles, depending on atmospheric occlusion and sea state. The hull of the ships won't be visible until about 5 miles, depending on atmospheric occlusion and sea state. At 9 miles away, the target should be 26 feet behind the curve, but this isn't what's observed. My final flat earth point on submarines is with regard to the AN/WSN TAC-7 ring laser gyro that is used on board of U.S. Navy submarines. A typical gyroscope, like the ones used on board of an aircraft, is a device used for measuring or maintaining orientation and angular velocity. It is either a spinning wheel or disc with a counterweight, in which the axis of rotation is free to assume any orientation by itself. When rotating, the orientation of this axis is unaffected by tilting or rotation of the mounting, according to the conservation of angular momentum. However, a ring laser gyro doesn't have any established weight. They use light as a point of reference. It spins up a disc that shoots out lasers, and it has a digital encoder that deciphers where the laser strikes inside of the gimbal system. No make-believe gravity required.
let's just say we're like 30 miles away. These missiles can shoot much further than that. I can't give you the exact number, but say we're 30 miles away, okay? 30 miles is far. So from our ship, we can track on our we have like a missile projectile. It's like a radar, but it's a little bit different. It's specifically designed to track the missiles. You actually input the coordinates, latitude and longitude of where you want the missile to strike. Really, really high precision accuracy. Really accurate. We hit that launch and the missile, and it will hit that target 30 miles away, even longer than that. Now, here's the thing. Again, that's not possible on a curved Earth. These missiles are huge. 50 caliber projectiles that are carrying massive amounts of explosives in them, okay? Each one of these missiles are probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So whenever you're lining up these missiles to shoot at targets that are 30 plus miles away, if the Earth is spinning, again, now think about this. We're not sitting like on land holding a gun, all right? So picture this. We're on a ship, like actually in the middle of the water, okay? And the missile is shooting off of the bow of the ship. So if the world is a spinning ball and we're on this curved Earth with water and we're spinning 600 miles per hour through infinite space, I'm pretty sure that it would be physically like it wouldn't even make any kind of sense on a physics type level to be able to shoot a missile from a spot in the water on a spinning ball to pinpoint accurately hit another spot.
And at night, we were going on one ship, on a military ship, and this is with night vision goggles, 50 miles, and these guys were on the bow. They were not even on the bridge where you'd be 100 foot up. They were on the bow, which is barely probably 40 feet off the water's edge. So these guys, and they have the latest state-of-the-art. This was in 2015. 2015, they had state-of-the-art, what do they call them, night vision goggles. So these things are capable of seeing that far if we live on a plane. You can't deny it. It was so obvious, but not to everyone else. I guess the programming's harder than other people, so they don't want to hear it. But over the years, I have learned the model. I know the model like the back of my hand. I can show proofs. I have ammo now. So when I go out there and I tell somebody, hey, that's impossible, and I'm talking to a third mate or a second mate who's an officer who went to college, meaning they paid for their education. Because when you pay for your education and you're making a handsome salary on it, you can't be wrong. How could I be wrong? I'm making a salary, they're paying me, I paid for this career, everything's working great in my life. You are obviously wrong. All the math works. So with that, it's hard. But when you stump them and you start showing them stuff, it's hard for them to say. And then they start saying stuff like, oh, well, what does it matter anyways? I don't care.
The narrative began to fall apart. I would continue studying and finding that what I fear to be true is reality. That we have been lied to about just about everything. Upon researching military history and then military training and speaking with military gunners in both the Army and the Marine Corps that I know personally, I would ask them about Coriolis effect. And it was always assumed that, yeah, we compensate for the Earth being, a curve, that it would drop. We calculate for the Earth curvature. But even upon asking and having them look into their materials further and my own personal study, again, it found to be an assumed truth with no actual basis in reality. That they would calculate bullet fall based upon angular velocity, drop, friction, amongst other things. And curvature was supposed to be just corrected along with it, just like flying, wind correction angle corrected for Coriolis effect.
I've done many of them personally. I've flown more than 1,070 hours in both helicopters and airplanes. And I will tell you factually that aircraft meet their checkpoints, they take off, they meet their checkpoints, and they land exactly as planned on a flat stationary map. No pilot, I say again, no pilot has ever accommodated for the rotation of the Earth when planning flights and takeoff to checkpoints along the way, and then landing. Pilots can plan so well that they can take off and land hundreds of miles away down to within 30 seconds of their planning, because the Earth simply does not rotate.
A waypoint would be like this. Like, let's say we're out in the middle of the water and we want to hit a target that's like directly to our west, 15 miles away. But that target is able to track our missile coming at them. We don't want that target to know where the missile's coming from. So we can put in waypoint. And a waypoint would be like putting a point out like 20 miles east, and then another point like 15 miles north, and then another point like 10 miles south of that, and then put in our target. You see what I'm saying? So the missile doesn't go directly from the ship to the target. The missile will actually fly to the latitude and longitude of the waypoints that are put in, and then it will curve from there, and it will hit all the waypoints and then attack the target. How is that possible on a spinning Earth? If the Earth is moving at 600 something miles per hour, or whatever they say it is, there's no way that missile could stay. There's no way that missile would be able to keep track. Do you understand what I'm saying? At least that's how I'm looking at it. It may be a little bit harder to visualize if you actually weren't seeing it the way that I would see it, or there, or understanding and putting in the coordinates, or seeing how this actually worked out. But I'm telling you, like, from my perspective, that is one of the things that makes it virtually impossible to accept the globe as this. Well, it's a fake lie. It's a theory. It's garbage, is what it is.
So that began my journey down the flat earth. And since that point, I've only found more and more voices, more and more educated people, educators, professionals who are beginning to shed light on this subject in ways that I can only begin to imagine. But I'll never forget the day that I realized my plane wasn't falling around a globe, that I could look out the cockpit window, 185 degrees plus field of vision at 40,000 feet, and not see one iota of drop, but nothing but a flat, beautiful, motionless plane. The assumed calculations that we made that were compensating for Earth rotation were just a part of a calculation based upon wind speed and the angle we had to hold in order to fly against that wind and go in a straight line to our destination. It's one of the most freeing truths I've ever experienced, because in some small way, the idea that these other conspiracy theories and things we've been lied to about are true. But this biggest one is the biggest truth of all. We've been lied to about everything. It means we can start over. We can start again. At this time, at this point in our history, we are uniquely positioned to make that change.
And if I can make one statement to the people out there, it's simply this. That's it. That it's level. You cannot fall off the edge of an in-ground pool. It is level. Where you put your feet in the water in France, it's the same height that you're going to put your feet in New Jersey and Brazil. Do some research. This is not the only thing out there that needs to be researched, unlearned and relearned. The Department of Education, founded by Rockefeller in 1908, did a good job of proving that the mode of ignorance that he calls his education board, you are the proof it's working. The mode of ignorance widens every day. It gets bigger and bigger every day because people keep believing what they spit out. Unlearn. Thinking outside the box. The box is the cap that you got at graduation. So understand that for the first 18 years of your life, you didn't learn the truth about anything. You were simply told, and you got a reward for repeating it. Now it's time to think for yourself. It's time to do research and do your own testing. Be your own white coat.
So if you're able to actually open up your mind, look at things objectively, allow yourself to break free from the indoctrination bullshit that you were taught, you'll feel more free. You'll see the world differently. You'll love more deeply and compassionately. You'll appreciate life more. That's how I live my life. A couple years ago, honestly, I can tell you this. I just hope and pray with all my heart that, as the years go on, this is probably not something I'll see in my lifetime. But, as my children grow older and my children's children, as the generations go on, the truth will start to emerge. And it is starting. I mean, it's incredible, that so many people are starting to really awaken. But, 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, hopefully we can break free of the chains of indoctrination and really see the world for what it is and actually appreciate it and love the world and love each other. And I think if we all understood that there is a creator people would be less inclined to be so abusive toward each other and the earth. So that's my big message for the people. Just think for yourself. At the end of the day, just be a good person. Don't be so quick to just believe something and stand by that belief just because it was taught to you at a young age. Question it. Make sure it makes sense.
In closing, I'd just like to say that these are my own personal experiences. I never ask anyone to simply just believe everything I'm saying. In fact, please don't. That's how we've gotten into this whole mess to begin with, by blindly following others who say they've already done the research for you. You allow deceptions to occur. Please do your own research and test all facts.